All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for attending our 4th annual Women in Real Estate. This year it is a virtual luncheon as opposed to us getting together and having lunch and some wine. So thank you also very much for taking your time out of your busy schedule and your busy day to be here today with us. Happy International Women's Day. This year, the theme for International Women's Day is challenge to change. And it's very important that we as women do what we can do in order to lift and support other women around us. So last year we had the incredible Peggy Hill come out. The year before that, we had another inspirational speaker. This year, I thought it would be nice to have Dr. Peg Herbert out. Dr. Peg is a dynamic. This is her little bit of her bio and intro, and then I'll turn it over to Peg. Dr. Peg Herbert is a dynamic and inspiring speaker who is deeply passionate about both empowering vulnerable girls and women and educating men about the benefits of gender equity in rural Africa. As the founder and executive director of Help Lesotho, Peg has spent the last 17 years developing local staff and programs to achieve tremendous impact against staggering odds. Peg is the type of woman that many of us aspire to be, someone who leans into the feeling, I wish I could do something to help, and then turns it into concrete action. In honor of International Women's Day, Peg will share what she's learned about gender equity, both as a Canadian woman, mother, grandmother, and a leader of an international development organization tackling gender equity in a country with persuasive gender-based violence and patriarchal norms. So Dr. Peg, I like calling you Dr. Peg because you spent a lot of time becoming a doctor and you're a very smart woman. And I think that you deserve to have that title. So I really like calling you Dr. Peg. So ladies and gentlemen, I will turn it over to Dr. Peg Herbert.
Thank you. That's what a lot of the kids in Lesotho call me, Dr. Peg. But thank you, Sherry. That's a lovely introduction. And this is really a special opportunity to discuss gender equity with so many professional women wherever we are. And I want to just take a minute to thank Hallmark Realty. Hallmark Remax has donated office space to us since April 2009. And the funds for our work from the Hallmark Giving Charity Foundation. And you will all appreciate what a staggering difference this makes to the amount of money we can actually send over to Lesotho for our programs. I have lots of reasons to stay awake at night, but paying the rent during this pandemic is not one of them. And we are extremely grateful and we never take that for granted. If I were in Lesotho, I would begin by saying, Dumalangbo Ketabela Haubona Haholo in the Sesotho language of the country. On this International Women's Day, I'd like to share a bit of my journey that has led me to such passion about helping thousands of girls and women every year. So let's start at the beginning and then we can chat. You may never have heard about the tiny mountain kingdom of Lesotho. It's entirely landlocked within South Africa. It's a Commonwealth country. It has a constitutional monarchy, and it is pretty much exactly the size of Belgium or Maryland, with a population of about 2 million people. You may never have heard about Help Lesotho, an Ottawa-based NGO with donors across Canada and around the world. But you might have heard of our social enterprise, Pearls for Girls, which profits support our girls' leadership programs. So I normally spend months every year in Lesotho, and this is the first winter in 17 years I haven't been there. And while I'm there, I spend my time training all local staff, hosting international guests like Barbara, traveling up and down through the mountains to talk with our village project leaders and beneficiaries, building budgets and proposals, conducting program reviews, and dancing with grannies, hugging a huge number of people I love and admire. I strategize with local partners and meet with our patrons, Their Majesties King Letseya III and Queen Masenati, for whom I have great respect and a long-standing relationship. As I pondered about what I might talk about today, there are so many things I could share with you. I could regale you for hours with stories of my first trip to Lesotho in 2004, as I traveled by myself up and down through the mountains. Lesotho is the third highest country in the world. It's cold in the winter and incredibly beautiful. There were hours and weeks when I listened to school principals, teachers, children, nurses, nuns, priests, and government leaders. There were sessions I taught at the National University of Lesotho and the College of Education. Or I could tell you about the poverty and death from the HIV pandemic, in which everyone is either infected or affected, which left over 300,000 children and youth orphaned, without role models, without information, communication, or so often love. When I first went to Lesotho in 2004, 30% of the population were infected. Life expectancy was 35. With the third highest rate of AIDS in the world, people of all ages were dying everywhere I went. They were dying in the queues at the clinics. They were dying in vehicles. It was unbelievably heartbreaking. And now, in 2021, Lesotho has the second highest rate of HIV. 1 in 4 people are HIV positive, and life expectancy is 45 to 47. I could definitely chat for hours about the 86% of girls and women in Lesotho who report being victims of gender-based violence. By 35, 46% of young women are HIV positive, and how inseparable HIV and AIDS, COVID, and poverty are from gender equity. I could tell you about the 240,000 people who have benefited from our work since 2004, or the 45,000 people who have graduated from our long intensive programs. So this is about orphaned and vulnerable young girls who have no one in their lives to believe in them, no one to tell them what's happening to their bodies, what could happen if not forewarned. Girls are left with no one to protect them from predators who are trafficked, abused, and inevitably become victims of teenage pregnancy, early and forced child marriage, and sexual violence. Those beautiful young bodies ravaged by angry, entitled men and boys. This is about pregnant teenagers and young mothers who don't know about pre and postnatal care, about HIV transmission, or how to raise a child when they themselves had no mothers. It's about grandmothers who are looking after all those orphans, their grandchildren, and many others, often unable to feed them, to educate them, and paralyzed by the worry of what will happen to the children when they die. During a recent Grandmother Day, each granny was given asked by name to come up and receive new socks and a new blanket. And one bent over ancient granny stood up boldly and declared, "I, Rachel Metzi, do not have a blanket because the old ones I have are used by my grandchildren. This was the first time I am having a new blanket. I will wear my new socks when I go to church. Let me wear my blanket now, even before I reach home. Who knows when I might die? As for this winter, I was going to freeze, but because I have a blanket now, which I will share with my 3 grandchildren, I will not die from the cold. I will also be able to stretch my legs when I sleep, especially because my house has some holes which bring air inside. I'm filled with thankfulness that you have recognized us as grandmothers and have noticed our lives." Or I could tell you about the amazing, lovely, lovely people from all over the world who have stepped up to help us raise more than $22 million with no government funding. But what is very much on my mind, and I imagine is on yours, and as Sherry alluded to on International Women's Day, is the issue of men's involvement in addressing pernicious gender-based violence and sexual harassment. We need to know what works. I grew up in London, Ontario, and at the time, I'm sure it was one of the most homogeneous towns in Ontario. I come from a family of strong people, leaders who learned early and well how to look after themselves. I didn't particularly like the term feminist. I thought it was, sounded angry and uncomfortable. I didn't feel vulnerable, and so I just didn't get it. I went on to raise 3 sons and many of their friends. I had a full career working with leaders, successful women, abused and vulnerable girls and women. And yet I'm ashamed to admit that until I flipped my axis and saw the depth of the issue from the African perspective, I still didn't get it. I didn't know that I would come to believe that this is one of the 2 most fundamental issues on the planet, the other being climate change. And that if I was to start my career all over again, it would be about gender equity, just as I'm doing now. This cannot wait. Over the past few years, there's been a gradual and now explosive movement to protect girls and women globally. So many initiatives, calls for change, stories and examples, influencers stepping up. And now, because of this pandemic, there's a significant increase in the general awareness of how deeply systemic and pernicious are the consequences of inequity on girls and women. Men are being called out across the world. And I confess that I struggled soulfully and sometimes tearfully at night about what would actually work to take boys and men who've been and felt entitled all their lives to embrace gender equity. What does it take to stop this sexual harassment and rape and abuse of power? And what will engage men and boys in reflecting on their cultural attitudes towards women and motivate real behavior change? For 17 years now, we've been diligently educating boys and men and gradually stepping up the pressure for the members of the community to accept their responsibility in normalizing gender-based violence. Every year, we increase the emphasis. But the question remains, what works in turning entitlement into respect? Through our gender conferences, child sponsorship, Her Boy programs, leadership training, camps, life skills, school-based clubs, we've had maybe 18,000 boys and men in our intensive gender training, which is embedded in all of our 22 programs. We've learned a lot and had tremendous amount of feedback from the male population in this country. Getting to a world where the rights and dignity of women, girls, boys, and men are respected clearly is a long-haul goal, taking time, persistence, and commitment. Most people now realize this is not about one gender. This is about power distribution. This is about everyone acting with and being treated as an equally valuable, precious human being. There are many, many wonderful men in Lesotho, and I know so many personally. Our male staff are exceptional. As I share what we've learned, I need to caution that some of my remarks are generalizations for which there are many exceptions. So I've distilled these lessons into 4 lessons learned on how to involve boys and men in practicing and advocating for gender equity. And I believe that these don't only apply to boys and men in Lesotho, but rather are common to males everywhere who abuse. 1, broken boys and men will not easily be free from the need to use power to compensate and dominate. They become bullies, unable to grasp and communicate the subtleties of emotions and relationships. Lesson learned, they need help to deeply understand that bullying is not a valid means of gaining the respect they crave, but rather is evidence of a psychologically weak person who doesn't know how to communicate and who is not secure enough to try. Number 2, altruism will never make the degree of difference required. Lesson learned, boys and men need the chance to deeply understand why gender inequity is bad for men, for their family, for their culture. Number 3, boys and men rarely feel vulnerable themselves. Lesson learned, they need help to understand what abuse and disrespect feels and looks like by listening, to girls directly and clearly, boldly telling them. Number 4, boys and men often feel immobilized by this issue and paralyzed and have a paralyzing associative guilt. Lesson learned, they need a lot of support in discovering what they can do personally and collectively to make a real difference, to feel powerful and in a positive and constructive way. And today I only have time to tell you one story about a young boy named Sita. When Sita finished primary school, his family couldn't afford the high school fees, so he became a herd boy, looking after cattle and sheep up in the high mountains. From the age of 12, and for 14 years, he lived an isolated life, wandering the mountainsides without education, support, or socialization. When his village chief invited him to our herd boy program, he jumped at the chance. This was the first opportunity this boy had ever had to better himself. And so during the 6-month program, he never missed a Saturday class. He soaked up every word and idea, despite being by far the oldest in the group. During the boys' public march in the streets of his town, he was front and center with signs to end sexual violence against women. Sita graduated from the program proud and changed. He was selected to represent our Her Boy program at a huge public event. With lots of encouragement and support, he wrote and delivered the first speech of his life in front of the King and Queen of Lesotho, intimidating government officials, honored international guests, and his peers, while being filmed by national TV and radio. He spoke bravely and passionately to a huge crowd of 800 people. And I quote, "My name is Sita. I live in a little village in Butibute. I was in Help Lesotho's Herd Boy program. As herd boys, we spend most of our entire lives looking after animals with no information about issues concerning us. I feel so honored to stand before you on behalf of all the other herd boys to give thanks 1,000 times for giving us this opportunity. The training has changed our lives, more especially mine. Most of us were never told about issues concerning HIV and AIDS, but the program helped dispel all false information about it. We tested for HIV and screened for STIs for the first time ever. We learned about the importance of good health and hygiene. We believe that this is going to strengthen our relationship with other people out there who've been considering us as animals. I used to be one of the perpetrators of violence against women. It seemed normal to us as herd boys to beat and sexually violate women's rights because no one took any action against it. The issue of gender equity to me and my fellow colleagues was understood as a way of depriving us of our privileges and punishing us. The training changed my whole thinking. Now we herd boys understand that women are human beings like us, with the same rights and worth, just like us. Therefore, we as men should stop abusing women and girls. Ladies and gentlemen, gender equity doesn't imply that men should be inferior. It only means that both men and women should have equal opportunities and power in decision-making over their lives, because they both have the same capacity. So to all young men in Lesotho, let us join hands and empower our beloved girls and women. How are we expecting them to live when we mistreat them? They are mothers and sisters, wives. Let us respect and honor them for the greatness they bring to us. So now, in my village, we have a committee of herd boys who are fighting hard, reporting cases of abuse. I am making a plea to every man in Lesotho to make it their assignment in their communities. We young men should work together to end violence against girls and women in any form. After that huge event, I ended up traveling all over the country, way to lots of remote places. And because it was on national radio and television, everywhere I went, no matter how remote the village, people were talking about this speech, not mine, not the king's, not all the other important people. Never had a herd boy taken such leadership or admitted publicly to being an abuser. People listened. Sita became famous in his village. Not even peers who attended university were as renowned. He had captured not only the plight of the herd boy, but their potential to be reintegrated into society as leaders. So several years later, I asked our local staff to find him. I saw this as a test of the real impact of our program. Could a young man hold on to that change over time? Sita arrived exactly on time, and somehow he found the money for the 75-minute public transport fare to come and see me. Sita's still a herd boy at 34, looking after cattle for hire, $20 a month. He still lives with his mother, his brother's wife and 2 children, and his sister's 2 orphans. He could not contain his delight. He was so proud to receive the call that he told the entire village, Help Lesotho still remembers me. He arrived sparkling clean and beaming. He said the program changed him forever. He had been a harsh man, thoughtlessly abusing women sexually. He said that once he started the program, he stopped completely and never did it again. To this day, whenever he sees a woman or a girl being abused, he either tries to stop it or he reports it. He said that he learned how important it was to know his HIV status, to get tested regularly, and to get treatment if required. And while he was telling me this, he pulled out his testing card to show me that it was up to date and indicated that he carried it with him always. Sita said that he tells people in his village that women must be respected and that should never be abused because they have rights. He reported that because of the program, he became confident and can now express himself. Before that, he'd been so shy, he never spoke to others. He couldn't express what was inside of him. His face shone as he described how proud he was of himself. He said, if it hadn't been for this program, he probably would have been in prison. But now he will never go there because he knows how to do better. He told me that donors who gave him this program must be very happy because his life will be better. He's a different man and he will make them proud. I so wish you could see the impact for yourself. It is absolutely possible to transform the lives of women and of men and boys to behave with respect. And as Sherry was saying, I do take a small group of people over to Lesotho with me every year to deeply participate in our programs and engage with our beneficiaries. Of course, our trip was canceled this year, but we'll resume in 2022. So let me know if you're interested. People ask us how to help, and you can help, even by sharing our posts on Facebook and Twitter, by learning about our work and becoming an advocate. For 17 years, I have sent 5 to 6 letters every trip, and most of them are at this time of year. They're called, obviously, Peg's Letters from Lesotho, just about what's happening on the ground. Last week, I sent out letter number 2, which is actually letter number 132. If you want to receive these e-letters, you can sign up on the website or read the previous ones on the blog page at helplesotho.org. I'll be sending out letter number 3 next week. Or check out the Get Involved page. There's lots of suggestions there. Social changes of this type can only be achieved through sustainable development over long haul. We must stick together on this issue of gender equity until it's achieved. Help Lesotho's mission is, and always has been, to create a critical mass of young people in Lesotho who can make healthy decisions and take leadership in their homes, communities, and country. We have no illusions. Of the 50,000 or more whom we will have trained by the end of this year, maybe 3 or 4 will rise to national leadership. The point is that there will be 50,000 people who believe in justice, human rights, and the empowerment of girls and women who will follow them. That really is what creates large-scale social change. So, ladies, at our age, We have so much experience. We've been humbled. We know our strengths and limitations. We've been around the block and we're not naive anymore. We have so much to give. This COVID year, excuse me, has given us all an unprecedented time to reflect on how to use our time, our energy, and our values. Perhaps the most critical fact is that we're modeling for our children and our grandchildren that it's important to care about others, especially those we don't know and who will never be able to give back to us. It's my experience that working with thousands of youth over many, many years, that if we involve them in global issues like this, they will have the opportunity to think through the systemic impacts themselves and will independently apply it to their own lives. And so I want the last voice of my story to be from a beautiful young girl named Tabit Singh, who wrote me recently. I thought I was nothing. I thought I could only be something if I were a boy. I thought men could never change. I thought this abuse was somehow my fault. And now I know that I'm wonderful and that these awful things that have happened to me are not my fault. I'm not bad because I'm poor and alone. I know now that I can be a leader in my community and I can be loved. Ladies, as mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends, let's do it for her, for our daughters and granddaughters. Let's do this because of all the ways to spend our time. This will change the world and everything in it. When a group of women decide to do something, they're an unstoppable force. So now is the time, and we are those women. Thank you, and let's chat.
Okay, my goodness me. So I think you understand why I asked Peg to speak. She has direct experience with educating both our men and our women about what women need, who we are, and all the things that go along with being a woman. I think one of the things that struck me the most, one day I was upstairs at Help Lesotho, and I was having a casual conversation with Kate Lambert, who works with Help Lesotho, and I don't know, I was buying something, and I said, you know, I've got extra $40 or $30, whatever it was, and I said, Kate, where do you think I should put this? And she said, oh, well, why don't we purchase some reusable sanitary products for our girls in Help Lesotho, because when they're menstruating, they can't go to school. And I said, oh, that's a great idea. You know, they shouldn't have to stay home, blah, 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 blah. And then Kate says to me, and I think this is what got me. Kate said, well, Sherry, if they don't have anything, they can't go to school. And if they can't go to school, they become targets because the men know that they can't get pregnant. So there's no proof of any sexual assault. I hadn't even thought about that angle. My only thought was, let's get our girls to school. Let's get them educated. Let's get them making a difference in their lives and their families' lives. I hadn't even considered that whole side of it. And I think that's when I think I broke down in your office. As a matter of fact, Kate, I think I had quite a
Lots of people do.
You know, it really was. It was a revelation as to how something as small as reusable sanitary products can save a girl's life. So anyway, it was a small thing, shook me to my core, but I think that it's important that we know what's going on out there, that women around the world may not be in our position. 80-something% of all women around the world have had you know, that whole Me Too movement have had a sexual abusive situation at some point or another, or a violent interaction. And so I think it's becoming upon us to educate. And I think Peg is right. We need to educate not only our girls, but also our men. So anyway, that was just my little tidbit. I will open it up to questions. Please feel free to unmute yourself, and you can ask Peg anything, whether it's about Lesotho, whether it's about her programs, how to get the message across to the men in our society, how to bring up our boys, you know, that may be 5 or 6 years old, that kind of thing. So let's open it up for questions. Anybody have a question? Sylvie, go ahead and unmute yourself.
There you are. First, Peggy, thank you. Wow. As you know, I spent a month in Lesotho, Maseru and all that. And I have lots of things in my house that I saw that I brought back from Lesotho. Is it getting better? Is it improving? I was reading about the Highland Water Project. I was reading about the solar panel because they're so high up in the mountain. They have lots of sun. Is it getting better?
That's a really good question. And the answer is complicated because for example, when I first went there, there was no treatment outside of the capital city. So HIV was a death sentence. So there's more treatment. Most people know about AIDS now. The terrible stigmatization is less. People have more vocabulary to talk about it. Birth control is available as long as your spouse doesn't necessarily see you taking it. The economy is not great because they've had these long, climate change is seriously impacting sub-Saharan Africa. They've had these long periods of drought and then flash floods that cause erosion, take the soil and the crops away. So after the AIDS pandemic, there really were grandmothers and children doing the farming. So many of the men died. So that is created problems with the productivity. Unemployment is very high. Things were starting to improve, and because of the increased access to the internet, the general knowledge of the people was growing. So they had more basic understanding of health and provisions, and also the understanding Lesotho is landlocked. It's a tiny little country high up in the mountains. So during apartheid, it was completely insulated. There wasn't much reason to go in, and there wasn't much reason, the only reason to go out was work as a migrant working population. So they didn't have a lot of change there. It's one of the most homogeneous populations in Africa. They're all pretty much Christian. They have the same language, the same culture. So change has been difficult. So the internet, I think, has made the most significant difference. And then comes along COVID. And just for example, at the borders were closed. So I can't remember what number it is, but the last letter I wrote last year, I talked about my journey back. It was horrific. I really had trouble. I left Lesotho in the middle of the night. Borders are being closed as I flew from country to country, trying to find my way home. And so Lesotho closed its borders then, and it was protected. But South Africa, their only neighbor, lifted the borders for Christmas, and 130,000 Basotho came home for Christmas and spread to their home villages all over the mountains. So by the middle of February, end of February, tremendous number of deaths. And that has slowed down. COVAX, which is the international repository of the vaccine for developing countries, is just starting to send vaccine. So Lesotho this week got 136,000 doses. But I don't know how long it'll be before they reach our population. The government is in a constant state of confusion. So there's lots of issues. And nothing is linear and nothing is simple. But it's a really good question.
Is the leprosy camp still there in Maseru? Because I was there in 79 during the apartheid, and I went to spend some time with the leprosy. Are they still there?
I've never heard of any leper colony in Lesotho.
Leper colony. There was one for sure. Yeah, that's a long time ago.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Peg, I have a question. I know you do a lot on an international scale, and I know Help Lesotho has been watched internationally. Have any of your leadership programs for girls, gender equality programs, et cetera, have they been adopted by other countries around the world?
Good question. So we have lots of requests, but our programs are very carefully structured and they take time, and we won't let anyone use them unless the people are properly trained. They're so good at opening people up, and when you're dealing with vulnerable people, you have no right to go into their lives unless you know what they're doing. So I'm very rigid about that. So about 3.5 years ago, I developed something called Change Force to help other organizations to do what we do. And we're now in the process of finishing off the certification program, where we've been invited to move into South Africa in a pretty big way. And we're working on that. But, you know, I was teaching in the university, I had a counseling practice. This was not my field. And I just saw so much bad development, people doing quick fixes that don't work. I'm sure you all, for yourselves, I know for myself, it takes me forever to change, no matter how hard I try. And when you need this degree of behavior change, then it takes time, it takes trust, and those things need to be built carefully, and they need to be respected at all times. So we are working toward that. So we have about 15,000 people every year in our programs, and that's really enough. We really would like to train more organizations and more sectors to do what we do. For example, we've done a fair bit of training with police. We'd like to really increase that, because if a girl gets abused, it's similar all over the world, and she goes to the police, she can be re-abused, she can be marginalized. The police can go to the perpetrator and make a deal with the families that has nothing to do with the girl, and just say, well, if you give the family this number of cows or whatever, then we'll just not bother pressing charges. So there, again, a lot of complications, but we're trying, we're working on it. But it's a great question. Thank you for asking.
Okay, who else has a question for Peg on this fantastic International Women's Day?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Suzanne.
Hello, everyone. Unfortunately, I was delayed and came in late, but I have a beautiful daughter, 21 years old, who's just in the process of graduating Gender and Women's Studies from Western, launching into her career. And I've done overseas work in different countries, and I'm wondering if you can make any kind of recommendation as to how she moves forward with joining this type of organization.
It's a challenge because universities are pumping out thousands and thousands of graduates in international development. Lots of young people want to do this kind of work, but the pervasive wisdom is that you should hire locally. You should respect the local culture, and they should be making the decisions. For example, all of our staff in Lesotho are local. We have no Canadians there.
I guess the question is, how can she get involved in maybe even on the Canadian side? Right.
So, well, one thing we do is we sometimes have graduates who are wanting a career in this. They go to Lesotho and work for a year. It's unpaid, but they can live there, and they learn the realities of it. You go from the theory of university to the heartbreaking reality. Injustice is unbelievably painful, and to stare straight in the eye of human injustice takes a very brave person. And you can't be effective unless you're willing to do that. So young people need to be grounded. Doesn't matter how much leadership you take later on, unless you are deeply grounded in the needs of people, then you start representing other things besides them. So that's one thing we do. There are internships in organizations. There are ways to make yourself more valuable. For example, learning about measurement and evaluation of programs, things like that. I just want to say that I'm very biased. I have a lot of opinions. I've worked hard for these biases. And one of them is that this women's movement is so great, but the emphasis is so strongly on what the girls can do. We must empower girls. Girls have to learn their rights. Girls have to do this. Girls have to do that. Girls are not the perpetrators. Statistically, they absolutely are not the perpetrators. We have got to create the means and the trusted venues where boys can start looking at these issues, can start feeling safe enough that they can evaluate this. Male to male peer influence, in my opinion, is probably the most significant force for behavior change with boys and men. And as long as the community supports and turns away, and I know myself, I didn't want to look at it. It's messy. We are not a very flattering species. Some of the things that are happening are really, really ugly, and we don't want to see them. And so we turn away. And this is what allows all these men to get away with it. And the women's movement, these pervasive movements right now, they have taken the lid off the can. Men are being called out and very quickly being held accountable. So that's good for the people who've already done something to be accountable. But what kind of a world, what kind of expectations are we creating that young men and boys don't need to do this and get caught later? I had 3 boys in 3 years. My whole personal life is just filled with young men. And for them to grow up where they have absolutely no need to dominate women requires certain types of changes in the way we treat our sons, in the way we create expectations for them growing up. And it's just a mission of mine to try and help as many people as possible to feel comfortable looking at this squarely and see what we can do. And that I'm hoping that the pandemic helps us to realize that unless we help those people over there, wherever that is, they will come knocking. They will come with viruses. They will come knocking at the door saying, why do you get everything? Why can't I have some of it? And that's just a fact. So if we understand that, then we realize that we really must help everyone. And it can be done. There was a study done by Canadian University that had a really large sample size of 300,000 young people from South Africa and 9,000 from Lesotho. And there were more little boys sexually abused under the age of 12 than little girls. Boys need a lot of support. So we've just been through the Trump era. So much of that is cover up for insecurities, for all these things. And so there's a lot to talk about. It's complicated, but we all have people in our lives that we can reach out to. And one of the things I've learned the most that I think was surprising to me was how much people want to do something good and want to be part of something good, and how much one person can do. People often think of charity work as money, but I honestly don't think that. You can ask any of the staff. I honestly don't think that. I've seen so many individuals make a massive difference. For example, about 5 years ago, we got a very large check, well, for us, from a woman we'd never heard of. And I called her up and said, can we have coffee? We chatted and I said, well, how do you know about us? And she said, well, actually, I don't really know about you. But my best friend's been talking about you and this organization for years. And I always swore that if I had any extra, I would give it to you. And she's been giving us that same amount every year. I've come to believe that the greatest power is in being a really well-informed, focused advocate. You never know who you're talking to. The staff will tell you, whenever I'm talking to 100 people, it's always my prayer, my hope beforehand that 4 of those people will be touched and step up and step out and do something. It's not about masses of people. Help Lesotho is firmly based on the idea that it's always one person who says, yes, I will do that, and others follow. Yes, I can do this. There's always something we can do. And that's what this International Women's Day is all about. It's about celebrating the progress, but we've seen in the Trump era how quickly that can be taken away. I mean, I was so naive. I thought that this kind of social change could be incremental, that it was firmly fixed in law and practice. And then one person comes along and backtracks the whole thing. Stephen Lewis and Bill Gates, you know, they're talking about setting it back to 23, 25 years. So we need to stay vigilant, and women are amazing. What they can do and the support they can rally is beyond exceptional. So, you know, here we are on a day when we can think about what we're going to do.
Perfect. Thank you, Peg. Anybody else have, that was, whew, Boots, go for it.
Yeah, I just want to say something. My only connection, my only knowledge of Lesotho is the Pearls for Girls that was introduced by our REMAX office in the fall of 2019. So I understood that every time you buy items from them, part of the proceeds help the orphanage. So do you have any connection with this organization?
Good question. Pearls for Girls is a social enterprise initiative of Help Lesotho. It's ours. And it's a very, very small part of what we do. So we raise, our budget is about 1.7 million a year. And the pearls are a way to talk about girls. They're beautiful. I have them on. They're lovely. And they're a way to raise the consciousness of these issues and how girls' leadership is very important. But it is a very small part of what we do. We have funding in country from the UN, from the UNICEF, from a group from Germany, a group from Zimbabwe, from sometimes the EU, different, it's much larger. The Pearls for Girls is just something we sell to start a conversation. But we hope you'll buy.
Yes, and
They are
Marlene,
beautiful.
there she is. Marlene was on CTV News this morning. I'm going to post the link in our Facebook groups and on my Facebook page talking about Pearls for Girls on this International Women's Day. And I think that Peg's message is we need to take to heart. We need to stay vigilant. We need to speak out when we can, and we need to step up when we need to. And I think that as women, we are so strong that we are able to do that and help anybody and support fellow women instead of tearing them down. So I firmly believe that. And this is why we do this. We do this once a year so that we can just all get together and just be ourselves. Any last minute questions for Peg? I don't see any hands up. I'm going to just flip over to my next screen.
And I just want to say, please reach out. You know, we're here, we're in your building. Well, we're not really in your building, but
They're on the second floor.
we're on the second floor.
They're on the second floor, and I know that Marlene was promoting, and I don't have mine on today, was promoting their signature bracelet this morning. And, you know, Pearls for Girls is a fun way to do exactly what Peg said, which is start the conversation about women and women in leadership and what we can do to help our girls and our boys to create a more gender-friendly environment, gender equality, however you want to talk about it. We just need to be treated with the respect that we deserve. And that goes to everybody on the planet. So it's a fun way. I have lots of jewelry from Pearls for Girls. It's one of my favorite places to shop, especially at the holiday season. But they do a lot more than that. There's blankets, there's baskets, there's oh my goodness, I can't even. And all those programs help women to get off the streets and become productive. Correct, Peg?
Yes, what the core of our programs, my field is cognitive psychology, how people learn and solve problems, how people become critical thinkers. And the idea is to help women, I mean, 70% of our programs are for women, but to help them and the men to become self-aware, to know their rights, to have a voice, to speak of them, and to know how to make healthy decisions, to heal from their trauma, and to be able to help others. Every single thing we do emphasizes the fact that whatever you're given, whatever you know, you can go out and use that to help other people. That's very much a part of our world. Jane, sorry, you were.
I was just going to ask a question in regards to Remax Hallmark. The Simcoe County area is relatively new to Hallmark, and what you're talking about, the Pearls for Girls and things, I'm not aware of it. I know there's a few people on this today that are from Simcoe County, but maybe some of that could be sent our way so that we're more familiar here about it.
Great. Maybe Marlene can reach out to you, Jane.
Yeah, Barbara is is from the Barrie area, so Barbara.
Yes.
So she might be able to send it, but just sending a red flag out there that we're not familiar with all of this. So be great to educate our group, and I'm sure you'll get lots of support from them as well.
Thank you.
Perfect. So so Jane, one of the things, Paula Carney is now sitting on our board of directors.
Oh,
I love Paula. So
Yes.
she's now sitting on our board of directors for Hallmark Giving. And as Peg said, Help Lesotho is one of those charities that are ingrained in us to support. We had Pearls for Girls at our potlucks, and we haven't had any because of COVID. So that's one of the reasons. But 2-3 years ago, Marlene toured all of our offices for our Christmas potlucks, and with their displays, et cetera, et cetera. So they have a wonderful, wonderful website. They always have a spring line and a fall line come out. And so it's never the same. Anyway, it's fabulous. My front desk, my office coordinator was actually making bracelets for today's day for the signature. So there's so many different ways that we can help with, you know, even in our own country, because it is about having those conversations, because these things that are happening in Lesotho are magnified, but they are happening here in Canada. They're happening in your city, in your town, in your backyard, in our schools. And we need to, like I said, we need to really take action and step up when we need to, and talk about these things openly so that people know what is expected and what is not acceptable behavior.
I want to thank you for the opportunity to talk about this and to wish you all well. Each of you have your own pressures and stresses, especially now during COVID. We all have shadows on our heart, and we're all trying to be better people. And I just want to send you all a hug and thank you for joining our lunch. And we will meet in person soon, hopefully.
At some point. Thank you all so very, very much. Marlene has put a number of things in the chat. If you need anything or want anything else and you cannot get in touch for some reason with Peg, Kate, or Marlene at Help Lesotho, reach out to me. As I said, they're just right upstairs, and I can connect you. Thank you all so very much. I hope you have a fantastic afternoon and happy Women's International Day. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.